All right, we come at last to meditation 6. There are two major goals in meditation 6. One is to sort of bring back the physical material world, the world external to Descartes' mind. This is what was put into doubt in meditation 1. Meditations 2, 3, 4, and 5 have all been about getting back to the point where Descartes can prove that these things exist. At the same time, he's going to be proving that the senses can be relied on, at least to an extent. And he's also going to prove what the fundamental nature of physical things is. And that last thing is going to be important because the second major goal of the meditation 6, is to prove that dualism is true. To take his position on the relationship between the mind and body, or mind and matter. And his position is going to be a dualist one, much like Plato's. So what we have here is first an argument, a proof that the physical world exists. So the first point to make is that the senses are passive, right? The senses aren't like your intellect or understanding. It's not even like your imagination. You can use your imagination to come up with all sorts of interesting things, but your senses don't do that. You can tell the difference between when you're imagining, hopefully anyway, between when you're imagining something and sensing it. When you're sensing it, the information is coming to you. You're not going out to get the information, nor are you making the information up. So the senses are passive. The fact that the senses are passive means that something else besides the senses have to sort of get them the information, right? Something must cause your sensory experiences. So we'll say. Something must cause your sensations. And there are only, Descartes thinks, three options here. There's God, myself, or some other object. That can be responsible for being the cause, right? I should put an or, not a comma. Sorry about that. And these are the only things that can be the cause. Right? And what he's going to say is, he is not the cause. Because he can't control it. Right? His idea is, if he were the cause of his own sensations, then he could control what his sensations are. But he can't. He is passive. It's not just his senses are passive. He himself, overall, not just his senses, but his intellect, his imagination, they're all passive with respect to incoming sensory information. Your imagination can come up with new ideas, new sort of sensory ideas by recombining, right, the ideas that are coming in. But you can't give yourself new sensations. You can't stop yourself from experiencing something. I mean, you can block off your ears, but you can't just stop the ideas from happening, meaning you're not the cause of the ideas. You're not the cause of the things that are coming in through your senses. So he is not the cause because he lacks control over sensations. God is also not the cause, because if God was the cause of our sensations, then God would be deceiving us. So suppose you're having some kind of sensation. It could be visual sensation, auditory sensation, any kind of sensation. You're not, I think most of the time anyway, having a sensation of God. Like, I'm right now having a visual sensation of my phone. I'm having an olfactory sensation of the kitty litter that's in the basement where I work. I'm having all sorts of sensations, none of which are of God. So if God was the cause of those sensations, then God would be tricking me. God would be deceiving me. And God would be doing it all the time. And that's not what's going on, right? Because, as he's already taken himself to have shown in Meditations 3 and 5, God is perfect. So God can't be a deceiver, right? So God is not the cause, because God is not a deceiver. So he's ruled out two of the three options by appeal to his own knowledge of what's going on in his own mind, in particular that he lacks control over his own sensations, and knowledge about God, which is supposed to have followed from these proofs, right, that God is not a deceiver. That leaves only some other object. And if that object has to be at least somewhat like what Descartes is perceiving, his sensations have to be some kind of guide to what the thing itself that you're having a sensation of is actually like. Or again, God would be a deceiver. Even if God isn't causing them, if God set up our sensory faculties so that we were wildly off base when it came to what the real world was like, the real world outside of us, then God would have set us up to be deceived. And God's not a deceiver, so it can't be that the objects are wildly unlike what we have a sensation of. Some other object, I'll say similar to our sensations, is the cause. And this is just to say there are physical things out in the world. Descartes has at this point taken himself to have proven there are objects external to him, similar to his sensations, which cause his sensations. That his sensations are, to some degree, a reliable guide to the way the external world is, because he can't be the source of them, and God wouldn't be the source of them, and God would not have made us so that we don't have reliable access to what the external world is like. However, the external physical objects, Descartes thinks, are not exactly the way we sense them. Descartes' model of how this works is that you can break things down, everything down, into substance, attributes, and modes. Okay, so let's start with substance and modes, and we'll get to attributes after. Think about your sensory interaction with the world. Right? We've got the five senses: vision, smell, taste, touch, hearing. I think I just named them all. What those do is they provide you with access to certain kinds of properties. Right, so vision provides you access to color. What you really see when you're seeing things is color patches. Now, you're representing the world as being this three-dimensional thing. So you take yourself to getting more information than just the where there's color located in your visual field. But really what's going on, it seems, is that you have a flat two-dimensional field that your mind interprets as three-dimensional. All you're getting is a visual field with a bunch of colors in them. And to see why that's true, like think of pictures you've seen that have been drawn such that they look three-dimensional, but you know they're really not, right? All they are is lighter and darker patches of color. So really what vision gives you access to is color. What your hearing gives you access to is sounds. What taste gives you access to is flavors. What smell gives you access to is odors. What touch gives you access to is, I guess, roughness. I don't know. I don't know what word we give for that. But tactile sensations. Right? These are the properties through which we come to have an understanding of the world. But here's the thing. Color and sounds, and I'm just going to, I'll add odors and flavors. That's taste and smell. Colors, sounds, odors, and flavors are, Descartes thinks, not really part of the objects themselves. Descartes is not the first, but he is one of the more prominent people to divide the different properties that things can have into primary and secondary qualities. He does not use this term for them. This is a later term. And all of these things, color, sounds, odors, flavors, are secondary qualities. Primary qualities are things like extension, density, motion or velocity, let's say. These things are primary qualities. Color, sounds, odors, flavors are secondary qualities. Our senses only give us direct access to the secondary qualities. We do not have direct sensory access to the primary qualities. But the primary qualities are what are truly essential to objects, and secondary qualities aren't. So now I return to this thing about substances, attributes, and modes. Substances and attributes are qualities or properties. These are things that an object has. They're things that are true of an object. Take any object, you can have some things that are true of it. Here is the plug-in for an iPhone charger. It's the actual charging box, or whatever they call it. I don't know. It has certain qualities. It's white. It is rectilinear. It's a rectilinear prism with two little spokes coming out, or whatever, like two little pieces of metal coming out. It has no detectable smell because it's just like plastic. I'm not going to taste it, but it makes a certain kind of sound when it hits that my desk. Makes that kind of sound when it hits my book. Makes that kind of sound when it hits metal. It also all sorts of qualities. But all those qualities are had by the plug. The plug is the thing, and the various qualities have to have something they're qualities of. The idea here is fundamentally a grammatical point. When you're describing something, you're doing something like saying X is Y, or X has Y, where Y is a quality, right? So I might say the apple is red, the apple is sweet. Right? The sweetness and the redness are qualities the apple has, but there has to be something that they are qualities or properties of. That is the substance. Right? So the substance is the bearer of properties, right? Or bearer of qualities. But everything that's true about the substance is a quality. Any claim you want to make about the substance is a quality that it has. And the qualities break up into two categories. They break up into the categories of attributes or modes. Attributes are essential qualities, and modes are non-essential qualities. To say that something is essential is just to say it is a feature that something, or a quality that something has that it cannot lack, that it's impossible for it to lose. So for example, human beings are essentially mammals. But we all have properties that aren't essential too. I am a philosophy professor. That is a quality of mine. So if you say Patrick Mayer is a philosophy professor, you said something true. But it's not essential. I could have been something else. I could end up not being a philosophy professor. If the economy keeps going downhill, I probably won't be a philosophy professor for much longer. Well, that was depressing. But anyway, being a philosophy professor is a non-essential quality of mine. It is true of me, but it doesn't have to be. It is not essential to my nature. Right? So we got modes and attributes. So here's the thing. The secondary qualities are all modes. And the primary qualities are attributes. What that means is, our access to the objects in the external world only comes through their non-essential properties. Now, why does Descartes think this? Well, Descartes thinks this because he thinks you can imagine any object without its color, right, its characteristic sounds, odors, or flavors. Right? So if you were to take, or go back to his wax example, right? This is where he pretty much lays out the case for this. When he first gets the wax, he tastes it, it's sweet, it smells like honey, it makes a certain sound when you hit it on something, it has a certain color, right? It has a certain feel to it, like it's firm. Those are all secondary qualities. Those are the qualities your senses have direct access to. When you subject the wax to fire or to heat, it changes all its secondary qualities, but nonetheless remains the same wax, remains the same stuff. Which means if things can undergo changes to all the secondary qualities, then none of the secondary qualities are essential to it. They're all sort of temporary features of whatever has them. The primary qualities are the things you can't imagine any object without, right? You can't imagine the wax losing extension. Extension is basically the amount of space that something occupies and the shape that it has. So basically shape plus volume is extension. Maybe I should write that down. Quality is shape and volume. Try to imagine any object without having a volume. Now, the particular volume it has can change. The shape it takes can change. But try imagining it without having a shape or volume. Like try to imagine an object that doesn't have a shape. It's like, well, you can't, right? So it can change the value it has, right? The amount of volume, the particular shape it has, but it can't lose those things. Something similar for velocity or density. Its velocity can change, but it can't have no velocity, right? There's some fact about the direction and speed at which it's moving. It can have a velocity of 0, but that's not going to be the same thing as no velocity. And density, it's going to have a density. It can't lack that. Like something can't be an object without those things. But Descartes thinks everything there is in every secondary quality is something that the object can completely lack. He thinks it's possible to have an object with no color whatsoever, an object that doesn't have any odor whatsoever. In fact, he thinks really if you take us out of the equation, if you take observers out of the equation, then they don't really have those features at all. All that they have, Descartes thinks, is a tendency to produce these experiences in us. Color, sounds, odors, and flavors are features not of the object, Descartes thinks. They're features of our experience of the object. The object has a tendency to produce those experiences in us, but it's not like there's anything like the color in the object. It's not like there's anything sweet about the object. Sweet is just the experience we have when we taste that object. So secondary qualities are just tendencies that an object has to produce certain experiences in us. If there was no one observing these objects, if there were no human beings or animals to have sensory experiences, there wouldn't be any such thing as color or sound or odors or flavors, Descartes thinks. But there would still be objects that have some extension, some density, some velocity or other. So what that means is our senses only give us access to the non-essential properties that things have. And we have to make inferences. We have to engage in scientific reasoning to move from the non-essential qualities to the essential qualities. So the objects that exist out there, Descartes thinks, are somewhat similar to what we sense, but only to this extent. God has given us an ability to figure out information about the objects in the external world indirectly via our senses. So the objects, which are fundamentally just objects that have a certain shape, a certain density, and a certain velocity. I don't know if he has any other primary qualities. He might, but those are the central ones. Objects that are essentially just things that take up a certain amount of space, have a certain amount of matter inside them, and have a certain direction and speed. Those things cause in us, in a reliable way, certain experiences, and then we make inferences about the extension, density, and velocity from those experiences. But the objects aren't actually at all like our experiences of them, or they don't have to be. And so the world is not as we perceive it to be completely. Descartes thinks what God has done is provided us a way to figure out what's really going on, figure out what the primary qualities of things are via their secondary qualities. Because of that, it doesn't count as deception, even though, Descartes thinks, when you get right down to it, objects don't have a color, objects don't have a sound, objects don't have odors or flavors. And so as a result, everything we actually sense about the external world isn't real. Now, why think this? Why come up with this distinction? Because it's not like Descartes actually has an example proving that objects can lack a color. You've never seen an object without a color. You might have seen an object with a boring color like gray or white or something like that, but that's not the lack of a color. Similarly, you've never encountered an object that just can't make a sound or can't have any odor whatsoever. The wax example is not an example of that. The wax example is an example of something changing color, changing its sound, changing its odor, changing its flavor from one to another. But it still had some color or other the entire time. It's not some experience that Descartes can point to make this distinction. It's just the fact that Descartes thinks we can conceive of objects lacking that. Right? We can conceive their absence. And we can't conceive the absence of primary qualities. That's really the only difference. Also, part of what's motivating this is Descartes is one of the champions of the new mathematical approach to natural philosophy, as opposed to the Aristotelian approach to natural philosophy. The mathematical approach to natural philosophy, or what would come to be known as science, placed a great emphasis on giving a mathematical specification of an object and figuring out the principles that govern the object's motion by trying to figure out mathematical formula that describe that motion or any behavior, really. The primary qualities, you might notice, are the qualities that are easiest to give a mathematical specification of. They're the easiest to come up with laws describing changes in extension, density, or velocity. The secondary qualities are not. Right? Secondary qualities, it's taken a lot of work to get to the point where we have a good scientific understanding of color, sounds, odors, and flavors. Descartes had nothing in the neighborhood of anything like a sound scientific explanation of these things. And so part of what's going on here is Descartes wants to move away from the Aristotelian way of doing science, which focused much more on what Descartes is treating as the non-essential features of objects. And he wants to move more towards science studying these things. So there's both the conceivability argument, but there's also this desire to provide a justification for this new way of doing science, a way of doing science that Descartes was involved in, that Galileo was involved in at roughly the same time, that lots, like Robert Boyle was involved in. Lots of these people were saying, let's stop focusing so much on how things feel, how things seem, and let's try to impose a sort of mathematical order on the world. Part of the motivation for this book was justifying that much more mathematical approach towards understanding nature. And at least part of what's going on with this distinction is the desire to say, well, if you're focusing too much on things like color, sounds, odors, flavors, stuff like that, you're focusing on the stuff that's not even really real. To focus on the stuff that's really real, you need to focus on the primary qualities. But this fact that we never have direct access to the essential features of physical objects is going to be part of his case for dualism, which is what we'll get to now. And by get to it now, I mean in the next video, because this one's going to be a two-parter.